The Universal Happiness Archive lists human joyful moments as examples for all species. Part 1. Doctor's third eye twitched as she scrolled through another impossible entry. The blue light from her data screen reflected off her scaled skin while she sat alone in her research pod. Outside, the twin suns of Prime were setting, but she barely noticed. For the past 6 hours, she had been reading human submissions to the Universal Happiness Archive, and nothing made sense. The archive was her life's work. For 20 years, she had studied joy across 47 different species in the Galactic Confederation. She understood how the found happiness in mathematical perfection. She could explain why the hive species felt contentment only in unified thought. She had written papers on how the water-dwelling experienced pleasure through temperature changes in their pools. Every species had patterns. Every species made sense, except humans. Pulled up entry number 8472 from the human database. A female human named Sarah, age 34, had submitted her moment of joy. Read it 3 times, certain she was missing something. Greatest happiness, when my elderly dog finally caught the laser pointer dot after chasing it for 12 years. He held it under his paw and looked at me with such pride. I cried with joy. His claws clicked against her desk. The dog hadn't actually caught anything. The laser was a light projection. The human knew this. The dog would forget within minutes, yet this human had listed it as one of her greatest moments of happiness. Why? Where was the survival benefit? Where was the resource acquisition? Where was the logical foundation for joy? She moved to the next entry. A human male, James Wilson, age 47. Happiest moment, holding the door open for a stranger carrying heavy boxes. She smiled and said thank you. Made my whole day better. Felt her temperature rising, a sign of frustration in her species. The human had gained nothing. No social debt was established. No resource trade occurred. The stranger was not family. They would likely never meet again. Yet this human reported significant happiness from this interaction. It violated every principle of rational joy theory. The entries continued, each more baffling than the last. Humans reported joy from finishing books where they already knew the ending. They felt happiness from making children laugh. They experienced pleasure from the smell of rain on hot ground. One human wrote about the joy of completing a puzzle that took 3 months, only to break it apart and return it to the box. Stood and began packing. Her research pod felt smaller suddenly. She had requested the human submissions 3 days ago, excited to add Earth's Confederation members to her comparative database. She expected the usual patterns. All species found joy in safety, in food, in reproduction, in territory. The specifics varied, but the foundations were universal, or so she had thought. She pulled up the statistical analysis. The numbers made her head hurt. Where most species submitted between 300 and 800 unique joy experiences, humans had submitted over 40,000. The variety was impossible. Food appeared in only 12% of entries, mating in only 8%. Safety and security accounted for less than 15%. The remaining entries were scattered across categories that shouldn't exist. One category that kept appearing had no translation in her language. The humans called it Schadenfreude, but also reported feeling guilty about it. Another category was labeled nostalgia, which involved feeling happy about memories while simultaneously feeling sad. How could an emotion be 2 opposite things at once? Opened a communication channel to her colleague, Doctor, a researcher who specialized in emotional logic. His triangular head appeared on her screen, his 3 eyes blinking in sequence. It's late in your cycle. What troubles you? The human entries, she said. Have you reviewed them? Briefly, I found them chaotic but assumed it was a translation error. It's not translation. I with their liaison. They find happiness in suffering. Look at entry 15,839. She transmitted the data. A human named Michael Torres had written about his happiest memory being the moment he finished his first marathon. He described pain, exhaustion, and bleeding feet. Then he described overwhelming joy. He wrote that the pain made the accomplishment better. Skin shifted to a darker shade, indicating confusion. This is concerning. Pleasure from pain suggests a neurological disorder. Perhaps humans require medical intervention. There are thousands of entries like this. It can't all be medical. They report joy from difficult climbs, from solving hard problems, from surviving diseases. One human wrote about happiness from completing chemotherapy. Another described joy from reconciling with a family member after years of anger. Impossible. Joy is the reward for successful survival strategy. Pain and difficulty are warnings to change behavior. This species is contradicting billions of years of evolutionary logic. Felt a small relief that was equally disturbed. She wasn't seeing patterns where none existed. The human data genuinely didn't fit. "I want to present this to the Archive Council," she said. "Something is wrong with the human submissions. Either their data is corrupted, or they don't understand the archive's purpose, or," she paused, "or we need to flag them for psychological study." Consider this. Be careful. Humans are new to the Confederation. Accusing them of data corruption or mental instability could create diplomatic problems. Truth creates no problems. Only the lack of truth does. The next day stood before the Archive Council in their circular chamber. 7 species were represented, each council member an expert in emotional research. She displayed her findings on the holographic screens surrounding them. "The human submissions violate every established pattern of joy," she explained. "They report happiness in situations that should trigger fear, anxiety, or disappointment. They feel joy for others with no genetic relationship. They create artificial challenges and feel pleasure from overcoming them. I believe we need to investigate whether their submissions are valid." Council member Thresh, a elderly with silver-colored skin, spoke first. "You believe an entire species is lying to the archive." "Not lying, perhaps misunderstanding, or perhaps their translation of our concept of happiness is incorrect." "I reviewed the human entries myself," said council member, a floating gaseous who communicated through color changes in her containment field. "I found them beautiful. Confusing, yes, but beautiful." "Beautiful is not scientific," countered. "We maintain this archive to understand joy across species. If one species submits data that contradicts all others, we must question it." A screen activated, showing the human liaison. He was a middle-aged man with dark hair and tired eyes. He sat in an office on Earth, morning sunlight coming through the window behind him. "Doctor, I've been listening to your concerns. I can assure you, every entry submitted by humans is authentic. We understand the concept of happiness. We simply experience it differently than you expected." "Then explain entry 27,445, said, pulling up the data. "A human reports profound joy from watching a fictional story where none of the events were real. How can unreal events create real happiness?" Smiled slightly. "Stories let us experience emotion safely. We feel joy when fictional characters succeed because we've connected with them emotionally. It's practice for empathy." "Empathy requires energy. Why practice it on things that don't exist?" "Because it makes us better at empathy for things that do exist." Leaned forward. "Doctor, I understand our entries are unusual, but they're real. Humans find joy in many ways, sometimes in strange ways, but that joy is genuine." Council member Thresh spoke again. "Thank you, liaison doctor. We appreciate your diligence. However, without evidence of intentional deception or error, we cannot reject a species' submissions. The human entries will remain in the archive." Felt her temperature rising again. "Then I request permission to continue studying them, to understand why they're so different." "Granted, we're all curious about humanity's unique perspective." The council adjourned. remained in the chamber staring at the screens of human entries. Thousands of moments of joy that made no sense, but had seemed genuine. He wasn't confused or lying. He spoke as if human happiness was perfectly normal and her confusion was the strange thing. She pulled up another entry at random. A human child, age 7, had submitted a drawing instead of text. It showed stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. The caption read, "I'm happy when my family is together." That one made sense. Family bonds created survival advantage. But next to it was another entry from the same child. "I'm happy when I jump in puddles and splash water everywhere." Closed her eyes. Somewhere in this data was an answer, a pattern she wasn't seeing. Humans weren't insane. They were a successful species who had survived a difficult planet and built a thriving civilization. Their joy had to make sense somehow. She just needed to figure out how. Part 2. 3 weeks passed and assembled a research team. 6 scientists from different species gathered in her expanded research space, each bringing their unique perspective to the human happiness puzzle. They divided the 40,000 entries into categories and began systematic analysis. Doctor handled the logical analysis, searching for mathematical patterns in the joy responses. Doctor, a hive representative who could process multiple thoughts simultaneously, tracked correlations between entry types. A young named examined the emotional intensity ratings. 2 other researchers managed data organization and translation verification. "I found something disturbing," announced during their 5th meeting. His skin had turned a dark purple, indicating deep confusion. Humans report significant happiness from vicarious joy. They feel pleasure when others succeed, even when those others are not genetically related. Moved to his screen. He had isolated over 8,000 entries describing happiness from other people's achievements. Parents feeling joy at children's graduations made sense across all species. But humans also reported joy from watching friends succeed, students learn, strangers accomplish goals, and even competitors win fairly. One entry read, "Happiest when my best friend got her dream job, even though it meant she was moving away and I'd see her less. Her happiness made me happy." "The human loses companionship but reports joy," said. "This is backwards. The logical response is sadness at the loss, perhaps mild pleasure at the friend's success. But primary joy, that's not how emotions work." Doctors' multiple voice tones harmonized in their species' way of showing excitement. "I found something stranger. Humans report happiness from fictional events, not just stories, but games, movies, and plays. They know the events aren't real, yet they cry with joy at fictional weddings, cheer at fictional victories, and feel genuine happiness when fictional problems resolve." She displayed entry after entry. Humans describing joy from watching characters in books find love, happiness from seeing painted images of beautiful places they'd never visit, pleasure from songs about experiences they'd never had. One human had written an entire page about the joy they felt when a television show character finally told their father they loved him. "None of it's real," said, her tones slightly discordant with confusion. "Yet they process it as if it is. Their brains don't seem to distinguish between real and fictional joy." They raised a tentacle. "I found the most disturbing pattern. Humans report joy from the process, not just the result. Look at the exercise category." The screen filled with entries about running, climbing, lifting heavy objects, and pushing bodies to exhaustion. But unlike other species who reported joy at being fit or achieving physical goals, humans described happiness during the struggle itself. They used phrases like runner's high, the burn, and pushing through the wall. They deliberately made activities harder, running longer distances, climbing steeper mountains, lifting heavier weights, specifically to feel the struggle. One entry from a human named David read, "Marathon training is my therapy. The pain clears my mind. Every difficult mile makes me feel more alive." "They find joy in pain," said quietly. Intentional, self-imposed pain. My species cannot process this. Pain is a warning, joy is a reward. They should not occur together. Had been silent, letting her team present their findings. Now she spoke. There's more. I've been reviewing the creativity and challenge categories. Humans deliberately create obstacles for themselves. Games, puzzles, riddles, competitions with arbitrary rules. They invent problems that don't exist, then feel joy from solving them. She pulled up examples. Humans who spent hours arranging colored blocks into patterns. Humans who created mazes and obstacles for themselves to navigate. Humans who played games where they had to follow complex rules that made simple tasks difficult. One human described happiness from solving a crossword puzzle. Another wrote about joy from beating a video game by following self-imposed restrictions that made it nearly impossible. Why would evolution reward making survival harder? Asked. It's counterproductive. Unless, said slowly, making things harder is itself a survival strategy. The team turned to look at her. She was forming a theory, pieces clicking together in her mind. Humans come from Earth. We all know it's classified as a high-gravity, extreme weather, dangerous predators, inconsistent resources. But humans didn't just survive Earth. They thrived. They spread across every climate zone. They learned to live in deserts, frozen tundras, dense jungles, high mountains. How? Adaptability, said, but all species adapt. Not like humans. Look at these entries again. They don't just adapt to challenges. They seek them out. They practice being uncomfortable. They train themselves to find joy in difficulty. Pulled up more entries. This human writes about happiness from learning a new language, describing years of frustration as rewarding. This one describes joy from mastering a musical instrument through thousands of hours of practice. This one finds happiness in rock climbing, deliberately choosing dangerous routes because easy climbs aren't satisfying. Skin shifted to a lighter shade, the equivalent of understanding dawning. They evolved to enjoy challenge. Anna, the ability to feel joy during struggle rather than only after success would be advantageous. It would keep them motivated through long, difficult survival situations. More than that, said, excitement growing. They evolved to create their own challenges during peaceful times to maintain that psychological flexibility. Games and puzzles are practice for problem solving. Fictional stories are practice for empathy and social navigation. Arbitrary competitions are practice for real ones. They're training constantly, even when safe. Made a rippling gesture of agreement. In water, my people become sluggish if conditions are too perfect for too long. Perhaps humans recognized this about themselves and invented ways to prevent psychological sluggishness. Look at the suffering category, said, pulling up new data. Humans report profound joy after surviving disease, ending toxic relationships, overcoming addiction, escaping danger. The joy isn't despite the suffering. The suffering amplifies the joy. They evolve to extract positive emotion from negative experiences. The team spent hours reviewing entries through this new lens. Patterns emerged everywhere. Humans who found happiness in rainy days because they appreciated sunny ones more. Humans who felt joy after arguments because reconciliation felt. Humans who deliberately fasted to make food taste better. Humans who stayed up late to enjoy sleeping in. They manufactured contrast in their lives to intensify their emotional experiences. This explains the vicarious joy too, said. If humans evolved in tight social groups on a dangerous planet, the ability to feel genuine happiness at others' success would strengthen group bonds. A human who truly celebrates their rival's victory is less likely to sabotage the group through jealousy. A human who feels joy at a stranger's happiness is more likely to build cooperative relationships. And the fictional emotions, added, his logical mind working through implications. Stories let humans practice emotional responses in safe environments. They can experience loss, triumph, fear, and joy through fiction, preparing themselves for real versions. It's brilliant, actually. inefficient in the short term but valuable for long-term survival. Felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the pure joy of discovery. Her team had found something no one in the Confederation understood. Humanity's relationship with happiness wasn't broken. It was sophisticated beyond anything other species had developed. "We need to present this to the Council," she said, "not as evidence of human instability, but as evidence of remarkable adaptation." "Some Council members won't like it," warned. "This suggests humans have emotional capabilities we lack." Truth is truth. The next day stood before the Archive Council again. This time, her presentation was different. She showed the patterns, explained the theory, and demonstrated how human happiness made perfect sense for a species from a. Council member Thresh listened carefully. When she finished, the old was quiet for a long moment. "So you're saying humans evolved to be happy in ways we cannot fully understand because we didn't face their challenges?" "Not exactly," said. "I'm saying humans evolved to generate happiness from a wider range of circumstances because their planet required it. They can be happy like us, from safety, food, and comfort. But they can also be happy during struggle, through others' joy, and from overcoming challenges they created themselves. It's not better or worse. It's different." Appeared on the screen again. He'd been listening. "Doctor, I think you're beginning to understand us. Humans learned a long time ago that waiting for perfect circumstances to be happy meant never being happy. So we learned to find joy wherever we could, in small moments, in hard times, in other people's success. We had to, or Earth would have broken us." "But you weren't broken," said. "You adapted." "We did, and we're still adapting. That's what humans do best. We find ways to keep going, and we try to enjoy the journey while we're at it." The Council voted to accept analysis and add it to the archive as contextual framework for human entries. But an unexpected proposal came from Council member. "Perhaps we should make the human entries more accessible to other species, as examples." "Examples of what?" another Council member asked. "Of possibility," said, her containment field glowing warm gold. "Many species in the Confederation are struggling right now. Climate changes on colony worlds, resource scarcity, cultural transitions. What if they could learn from humanity's approach? Not to become human, but to expand their own understanding of where happiness can be found." Felt that joy of discovery again. The humans hadn't just given the archive data, they'd given it hope. Part 3. The proposal to use human entries as teaching examples sparked intense debate across the Confederation. Some species found the idea offensive, suggesting their own emotional experiences were inadequate. Others were curious but skeptical. A few embraced it immediately. The Archive Council decided to run a pilot program with volunteer species and colonies. Volunteered to lead the initiative. Over the following months, she traveled to 7 different worlds, presenting human happiness data to psychologists, community leaders, and medical professionals from various species. The reactions varied wildly. On the logical species struggled with the concept of finding joy in inefficiency. But a colony of scientists working on a decades-long terraforming project requested access to human entries about enjoying the process and finding beauty in slow progress. 6 months later, they reported improved morale and better collaboration. The lead scientist told, "We were so focused on the endpoint that we forgot we'd be spending our entire lives on the journey." The humans helped us see that the journey could be satisfying too. The hive species initially rejected the entire concept. Their collective consciousness found joy in unified thought and shared purpose. Individual happiness seemed selfish and chaotic, but a splinter colony that had been separated from the main hive due to a communication accident reached out too. They were struggling to find purpose without the collective voice. Shared human entries about individual achievement, personal growth, and finding meaning in solitary moments. The separated hive members slowly began reporting new forms of satisfaction. They learned to appreciate quiet contemplation. They found joy in developing unique skills. One of them sent a message. We thought being alone meant being empty. Humans showed us that individual consciousness can be full too. The hosted for 3 weeks. Her presentation to their Emotional Wellness Council sparked particular interest in human entries about resilience and post-traumatic growth. They had recently survived a planetary disaster that contaminated a third of their oceans. Depression rates were climbing. Traditional approaches focused on returning to previous emotional states, but many found this impossible. Doctor, who had joined original research team, helped translate human concepts of growth through adversity for their people. They shared entries from humans who had survived disasters, diseases, and personal tragedies. Entries that didn't pretend the suffering was good, but showed how humans found meaning and even joy in rebuilding, helping others, and appreciating life more deeply afterward. An elderly named approached after one presentation. I lost my entire family in the contamination. I thought I would never feel happiness again, but I read about a human who lost her family in a war and wrote about finding joy in teaching young people so others wouldn't experience her loss. I've started teaching water safety to children. It hurts, but it also helps. The hurt and the help exist together. I never understood that was possible. Not every application succeeded. A warrior species called the tribe to adopt human approaches to finding joy in challenge and competition, but their interpretation became dangerous. They escalated their traditional combat sports to life-threatening levels, claiming they were seeking the human experience of overcoming extreme difficulty. Had to intervene, explaining that humans valued life even while seeking challenge. The joy came from voluntary, calculated risk, not from meaningless death. The incident taught her an important lesson. Human happiness couldn't be wholesale. Each species needed to adapt the concepts to their own nature and values. Back on Prime, continued studying human submissions while monitoring the pilot program results. She found herself returning to certain entries repeatedly. One in particular, from an elderly human woman named, had become her favorite. I'm 83 years old. My body hurts every morning. I've buried friends and family. I've lived through wars, pandemics, and personal disasters, but I still find joy every single day. This morning I felt it watching sunrise through my kitchen window. Yesterday it was hearing my great-grandson laugh on a video call. Tomorrow it might be finishing a crossword puzzle or tasting a perfectly ripe peach. Happiness isn't something that happens to you. It's something you find, even in small moments, even in hard times, especially in hard times. That's what being human means. Had read it dozens of times. She finally understood why it moved her. Wasn't describing superhuman resilience or special abilities. She was describing a choice. Humans chose to look for happiness even when circumstances didn't provide it automatically. During a video call she shared this observation. The human liaison smiled. The gentle expression she'd learned meant both happiness and slight sadness. That's exactly right, said. We're not built tougher than anyone else. We're not immune to suffering, we decided a long time ago that we couldn't afford to wait for perfect conditions to be happy. On Earth, perfect conditions never came. So we learned to make our own happiness. It's not always easy. Sometimes it's really hard, but it's better than the alternative. What's the alternative? Asked. Giving up, letting the world break us. We're too stubborn for that. The Archive Council met 8 months after the pilot program began. Representatives from 12 species reported benefits from studying human happiness entries. Requests for access had increased dramatically. Even species that initially rejected the program were now curious. Council member Thresh, who had been skeptical at first, spoke with what recognized as respect. The human entries have become our most accessed database section, not because humans are superior, but because they offer perspective we lack. They show that happiness is more flexible than we understood. I propose we officially designate human entries as universal templates, said, her containment field glowing bright gold, available to any species seeking to expand their emotional range or cope with difficult circumstances. The vote was unanimous. After the meeting, returned to her research pod. She had one task left. She opened a new submission form, selecting her own species designation, and began writing. I experienced profound joy today, not from achieving a goal or securing resources, not from temperature regulation or social status. I felt joy from understanding something complex after months of confusion. The difficulty of the journey made the moment of comprehension more satisfying. I learned this from studying humans. They taught me that happiness can be found in the struggle itself, not just the resolution. She paused, considering her words. Then she added more. 20 years I studied joy as a scientist, cataloging it like data points. Humans taught me that joy isn't just data. It's a choice, a practice, a skill. They don't wait for the universe to provide happiness. They create it from whatever materials they have available, even in the darkest circumstances. This is their gift to the Confederation. Not the specific moments that make them happy, but the underlying truth. Happiness is something you can learn to generate, regardless of circumstances. She submitted the entry to the archive. It felt appropriate. The humans had taught her that learning something difficult was worth celebrating. A message from appeared. Doctor, I heard about the council decision. Thank you for giving humanity a chance. We're honored to contribute to the archive. You've contributed more than data, she replied. You've contributed hope. Species across the Confederation are learning that they have more control over their happiness than they realized. That's valuable. Can I tell you something? Asked. When Earth first joined the Confederation, we worried we wouldn't fit in. We're loud and chaotic and emotional. We thought maybe we'd be too strange, too broken from our harsh world. But you found value in our strangeness. You saw strength where we saw scars. That means more than you know. Felt warmth spread through her chest, a physical response her species experienced during deep satisfaction. She'd spent months studying human joy, and now she understood it wasn't just an intellectual exercise. It was a bridge between species. Your planet didn't break you, she said. It taught you, and now you're teaching us. 3 years later, the Universal Happiness Archive had expanded its mission. It no longer just cataloged joy. It helped species learn to cultivate it. The human entries remained the most popular section, but other species had begun submitting their own examples of finding happiness in unexpected places. The started documenting joy found in beautiful mistakes, the shared entries about pleasure and stillness rather than just movement. Even the hive species began exploring individual satisfaction within collective purpose. Published her final paper on human happiness, titled The Adaptive Joy Response: How Humans Weaponized Happiness for Survival. It won the Confederation's highest scientific honor, but her favorite response came from a young student who wrote to her. I read your paper and the human entries. Last week, my research project failed after 2 years of work. Instead of only feeling disappointed, I tried the human approach. I looked for what I learned from the failure. I found joy in the fact that I tried something difficult. It didn't erase the disappointment, but it helped. Thank you for showing us there's more than one way to be happy. Kept that message displayed in her research pod. It reminded her why science mattered, not just to understand the universe, but to improve life within it. She often thought about the elderly human woman whose entry had changed her perspective. Happiness isn't something that happens to you. It's something you find. Such simple words, but they contained a truth that most species had missed. Humans hadn't evolved superior emotions. They'd evolved flexibility in how they experienced emotions. When circumstances were terrible, they found small joys. When challenges were overwhelming, they found satisfaction in small progress. When surrounded by darkness, they learned to create their own light. That was humanity's real contribution to the Confederation. Not data about happiness, but demonstration that happiness was possible even when the universe didn't cooperate. It was a lesson every species could use, especially as they faced climate changes, resource challenges, and the normal difficulties of existence. The universe didn't owe anyone happiness, but that didn't mean happiness was impossible. It just meant you had to work for it, look for it, create it from whatever materials you had available. Humans had learned that lesson on a harsh world that gave them no choice. Now, through the archive, they were sharing it with everyone else. Submitted one final entry to the archive, years after her first. It read simply, "Today I felt joy from watching other species learn to be happier. This is something I learned from humans, finding happiness in others' growth. It turns out joy is contagious, and that might be humanity's greatest gift of all." She smiled, a gesture she'd learned from watching too many human videos. Then she went back to work, helping another species understand that happiness, like so many things humans had discovered, was simply a matter of practice, patience, and choosing to see the light even when surrounded by darkness. The universe was harsh, but it was also full of beings learning to be happy anyway, and that thought was beautiful.